morning. We have a very interactive crowd, lots of people commenting and stuff. So absolutely amazing. Hey everyone, welcome back. And we are here with Jono Alderson from a company called Yoast. I'm pretty sure that everyone's familiar with Yoast. Lots of people used it. And Jono is going to talk about structured data beyond the basics. We are excited. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen? Am I showing all right?
Yes.
Good? Awesome. Thank you very kindly. Right, we're going to go super fast because we have somewhere slightly less than 20 minutes. So let's go. So over the last few years, structured data and schema.org has become one of the hot topics in SEO, but people are really only interacting with the very tip of the iceberg. They're only scraping the surface, which means they're missing out on opportunities, and they're missing out on the bigger picture and strategic, clever, exciting stuff. So I'm going to try and give you a bit of a broader, deeper view. But before we do that, we're going to start with a little bit of history, just to make sure we're all on the same page. This is me. You know that. We've just done that bit. That's an empty slide. That's exciting. Let's skip that one. So to start, 2011, schema.org, the website, had just launched as a collaboration between Google, Bing, Yahoo, and somewhat later, Yandex. This was exciting because it defined for the first time a universal way of describing all of the things. It's a set of methods and code, a language almost, which developers could use to structure and describe their content. So imagine a world where rather than relying on search engines to crawl and analyze our content on our pages to try and work out what they're about and parse all those keywords and try and build some context, you could instead use structured data to describe the specific attributes of the things in a way that search engines could just get. Prices, ingredients, your company's opening hours, images, authors, and more interestingly, perhaps, the relationship between all of those things. Fast forward 10 years, schema.org has matured a lot, and Google are pushing really hard for and incentivizing adoption of the standard. Now the rewards are much more explicit and more significant. Google provides rich results, access to new verticals, and types and formats of rankings and listings which are hard to achieve without using schema.org. You can see in the example here on the left what some structured data and schema.org markup might look like if I were describing, say, a product that had images and prices and a brand. And on the right, you can see an example of how Google might expose that. They might identify in image search that the image they're showing is related to a specific product that has a specific price, etc. Or they might show star ratings and prices. All of this enriches these results in a way that provides quick tactical wins. Schema helps Google to understand the web. So there's some give and take here in us providing extra context and Google using that to reward us with extra users and clicks. More on that relationship later. Over the last 18 months or so, around 3/4 of the updates that Google have published and described on their developer changelog page relate to schema. Take a second to let that sink in. 3/4 of the things that Google have done, or at least told us that they've done, relate to structured data. And these are new features, updates to tools, clarifications in documentation, expansion of coverage, guides and examples and case studies. Most recently, for example, they updated how they recommend that you describe authors, and they said that authors should have a URL, which isn't particularly profound, but it was quite a big deal, quite a big change in how they're starting to understand these relationships. They're doing all of this because schema allows them to improve their core service. And when we look at what their core service is, it's not crawling or indexing or ranking or anything we might think of as conventional SEO stuff. It is solving the problems of their users. And increasingly, the way that they do that doesn't manifest as a list of links in a search result page. It looks something more like this. Fewer and fewer of the search results we're competing in and for look like lists of links. And structured data is a critical key component of how we fight for discoverability and visibility in these environments. Now, these examples in the background are from an SEO tool called Systrix, who last year characterized over 40 different types of search results that they've seen across their data sets. And these include cards, tools, widgets, interactive things, answers, utilities. Now, to provide these kinds of results, Google needs to do more than just crawl the web and extract the content they find. They need to understand what they're consuming. They get that understanding from schema.org. Okay, everyone on the same page. Let's go. So, of course, the SEO industry chases the shiny tactics. We look for opportunities to frame our content prettily and nicely in the search results and to access those new verticals and formats, and in some cases, to bypass conventional ranking processes entirely. Pretty cool. In the examples here, you can see recipes outranking conventional search results by using schema.org markup. That is fun. However, there is much more that you can do. As of mid-October, August even, Google only supported about 35 different types of schema, depending on how you count it. However, in the schema.org dictionary, there are almost 1,500 types of thing. That's a big gap. Like, for example, consume action, which is a concept that allows you to describe when things can be consumed. None of you are using this, none of you have ever heard of it, but your content is consumed. Your things are watched, they're bought, they're responded to, they're commented on. All of these are forms of consumption. And using this in some cases might change how Google understands or presents some of your content. Also in ecosystems outside of search, in, for example, Gmail or YouTube. Schema like business audience, which if you have demographics or company sizes or revenue thresholds that you're specifically targeting, might allow you to say, this content is aimed at companies of this size. Suddenly this starts to get quite interesting. More esoterically, for example, many types of things in schema.org have more specific subtypes. Rather than describing an event, which, yes, might get me shiny tactical results in Google, I could describe a social event or a business event or a sale event. Rather than having just a web page, I might have an item page, which describes a specific object. Now, apart from better representing this content, my content, sometimes these more specific types unlock additional schema properties, which can in turn unlock more opportunities. This is one of my favorite books. This is another good example, but for the purposes of this conversation, what's interesting is it's more complex than just a book. It's also a product. It has chapters and an author and a price and reviews. I can describe it as both of these things using schema.org markup. And this kind of technique is really underutilized. So many things are or can be multiple types of things. Now, from Google's perspective, that might make one web page eligible for multiple types of rich results. And they're surprisingly flexible when it comes to parsing and understanding multi-typed relationships. And just to get really esoteric, some subtypes are inherently already multi-types. Local business is a multi-type of organization and place. Local business might have more specific subtypes and some of those, etc., etc. I'm going into a rabbit hole. How significant is this? Is it important enough to drop everything else that you're doing and focus on schema.org instead? Well, I think the answer could well be yes. Why do I think that? I stole this lovely slide from my friend Izzy Smith, who capped John Moo speaking from Google about structured data. And he says that even without the structured data leading to rich results, our systems profit, that's an interesting word for Google, by understanding, that's a really interesting word, the page better when they use structured data. Why is this important? Zoom out for a moment. Fancier search results and formats aren't Google's endgame. They're a stepping stone in a much bigger strategy of becoming what they refer to as the Star Trek computer, where Google Assistant, whether it's running on our phones or in our TVs or on my toaster or in the search box I type into on my browser, just solves our problems. And to do that, Google needs to understand our content, our businesses, our propositions, our USPs, our products, our words, our authors, all of these things. We can use schema to describe those. Things like our product information, our reviews, our price ranges, our shipping information, our returns policies. Not just general information, which they can already collect and analyze across our content, across the web, but specific information about our specific businesses and products and content. Rather, specific primary data relating to our content, which needs to be precise and reliable and timely. If you saw Dwayne's talk earlier about how important knowledge graphs are to Google and how we need to build our own to survive, this is a key part of how you do that. Because critically, Google don't just need to consume content and understand it, they need our context, our businesses, our products and services, our content, for any entities that you want to represent in a certain and specific way. Anything you want to tell a story about. Because it's not understanding that Google needs, it's our stories. Now, storytelling is the difference between this page is about a gadget and here's some pricing info versus This web page is about a gadget, which is a specific type of widget, which has X properties and Y dimensions and these images, and has a review, which is written by this reviewer, who's a person with this name and this URL. Oh, and the gadget is a product, which is sold by this company at this price, and it's manufactured by that company and is available with these offers, etc., etc. We're not talking about this gadget in the abstract. We're talking about the relationship between my company and this gadget and the web page that it's on and everything else on that web page and all of the things that connect those things together into a narrative. And as these stories expand, the relationships and those specifics get harder to magically infer. They need to be described. Those relationships are the context that Google wants and potentially needs. Oh, my thing stopped working. There we go. You need to use structured data to tell your stories. Google doesn't have your context, your specific information and pricing and content and authors and their details. And they can't just easily infer it by scraping the public internet. This is a product with a review is much different to this is our product reviewed by an expert with these, etc., etc. And you have many of these stories and they're all interwoven. We can describe our content with a level of connectedness that helps Google to understand us better. Will that give us prettier search results? Maybe, maybe not. But it does help Google to understand our storytelling better. And think for a moment, Google's mission is to organize and, yes, then represent and process the world's information. If you're a brand, you need to manage how they access, consume, understand, and represent that information in order to influence how people perceive you. Do you know what managing that information exchange is called? There is a word for controlling that flow. It's marketing. Where you try and control the story, where you're explicit in the inputs and their perceptions, where you use every resource you have to control the narrative between you and your audience. Except in this case now, Google is our primary audience. And again, Dwayne mentioned this, if we want to access the consumers and the humans we want to be able to market to beyond Google, we have to first market to and through Google. Because in a world where Google is getting better and better at judging the underlying product market fit, and where the only way we have to really help them understand our brands and products and prices and context is schema.org, we have to take full advantage of this. If you're not doing that verbosely, then you can't expect Google to understand your proposition well enough to present you as a solution. Don't worry though, nobody is thinking like this. There is still an opportunity for first mover advantage. Everybody in the SEO industry is implementing itty-bitty, disparate tactical bits of schema markup. Here is an FAQ page. Here's a recipe. Here are my restaurant's opening hours. They're relying on Google to join the dots between those entities they reference and the things they define, hoping that Google will magically infer the relationships and understand our storytelling. And all the evidence suggests that Google can't. There is no magic way in which they can extract and classify and cross-reference the things that we don't define. They can't understand unless we tell our stories. And in most cases, the most people do with Schema is use their content management system to define what type of page is this, and maybe add some attributes. This is an article, it has this name. Or they copy-paste Schema in from an example they've adapted. This is absolutely enough to get tactical, rich results and rewards today, but it misses tomorrow's bigger picture. Why is that a problem? Let me show you. This is a screenshot from a schema visualization tool called classyschema.org by a chap called Tony McCreath. And he has some example schema in it. You can see it on the right. It's precisely the kind of thing that an SEO might copy paste into a site. What you can see is there are 3 discrete groups of things. There is a list of videos at the top. There's an FAQ page and there's a how-to guide. And this is the problem. The schema doesn't describe the relationship between these things. It doesn't tell a story. It just says, here is some stuff. Please give me a rich result. It's copy-pasted code designed to make you eligible for tactical results. Google can't understand the brand, the proposition, the context, the story. This isn't marketing. It's just advertising. Here is a thing. Please come and consume it. Here's what it looks like when you get it right. This is a recent blog post from Yoast.com. Now, there's a lot going on here, but this is one cohesive story. We're describing a network of related, connected concepts. This is an article which contains a how-to guide written by a person, which is the main entity of a web page on a website published by an organization, which the author of the article works for. You can see these recursive relationships. All of these things have their own properties and relationships. This graph tells the entire story of this web page and everything on it and everything that's connected to them. This is storytelling. This is marketing. It's rich, it's interconnected, and it's explicit, and it contains context that Google might not be able to understand or infer otherwise. Okay, so how do we do this? I want to show you 3 slides of code. I promise no more. Strap in, seatbelts on. This is your starting point. This is schema.org described in JSON LD. Don't worry if this is terrifying. I will give you a shortcut. At Yoast, this is what we refer to as the base graph, and it's an approach we've designed to be robust, scalable, interoperable. It describes the web page, the website, and the organization. You can see the 3 different sections. This is pretty straightforward once you start to dig into these and see what these pieces do. We give each of these things an ID, a unique identifier, a way of saying that this is this thing. Nothing complex here. And then we cross-reference them. This organization is the publisher of this website. This web page is part of this website. And if we want to describe more things and their relationships, we just add another node to this list, and we use IDs to cross-reference those relationships. Once you have this framework in place, then all you really need to do is describe all of the things. You do a data inventory of your website and your business. You find the data you have, and you look at what's possible in schema.org, and you prioritize where there are opportunities to get rich snippets. Oh, we have recipes. Schema.org rewards recipes, describes recipes. Google has a rich result format for recipes. We should describe our recipes. This is the basics. It gets you to step 1. Gets you to something looking like this. The challenges, we haven't considered the challenges of the real world. For example, Google requires an article, which I've highlighted in red in the middle here, to have a headline. What happens if our writer forgets to put a headline into our CMS or our code? Well, our article is no longer valid, and all of these relationships start to break and throw errors. Now we're back in a position where we have multiple bits of stuff instead of one cohesive story. So the missing piece of this puzzle is that you also need to define the logic around where and how and when individual pieces of schema should behave, the business logic, for want of a better phrase. With all of that business logic in place, all you're really doing now is defining how things connect. I'm going to skip through some of this because we're short on time. You'll be pleased to know that whilst that business logic isn't defined in schema.org anywhere, I have spent literally hundreds of hours documenting all of it for all the major schema types. You can go and browse that on developer.yoast.com. If my article doesn't have an author and the author has a logo that's too big and it's a Tuesday, then you should change the graph in this way and not output X, Y, Z. All of those contexts and scenarios are defined. You can go and learn from that and use that to adapt and build your own stuff. Great. So how do you actually do this? I'm going to burst your bubble. There are only really 3 ways and processes. If you're lucky or smart enough that your websites are running on WordPress, then Yoast SEO does all of this automatically out the box for you. In fact, you're wasting your time by being here. Just go and crack on with improving your business and building some great content and links, etc., etc. But if you want to go beyond the basics that we do, our framework is also extensible. We have an API. It's all open source. You can build on it, adapt it. And many theme and plugin authors also extend on that to integrate their own stuff. That's pretty cool. If you are not on WordPress or you're not a Yoast user, check out Schema app or WordLift. These are powerful tools that let you define the business logic you want to use to construct your own markup and graphs. They're paid products. The pricing and the mechanisms work in different ways. Your mileage might vary, but these are really great. What you absolutely shouldn't do is try to manually construct and maintain your own schema code through copying and pasting or using JavaScript injection systems like Google Tag Manager, because these types of approaches are super brittle at scale and they frequently break as websites and the world changes around them, and they don't support non-JavaScript systems like Bing and Facebook and other areas, etc. You really do have to use WordPress and Yoast or Schema app or WordLift or build your own solution from scratch. But that's pretty dense because, for example, this is what you start to end up looking like just for articles. This is just an article. This is when was it published, who wrote it, what's the name of the person who wrote it, what's their description, how tall were they, where did they go to school, etc. All of this is interconnected in order to help Google understand that this article was written by an expert, that it's published on a site which knows what it's talking about, that it's categorized in a certain way, that it has an estimated reading time, that we know the number of words, that it's structured in a certain way, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. You cannot do this manually through copy and paste. You can do it by building on the Yoast schema.api, again, developer.yoast.com. I spent 6 hours a couple of weeks ago doing this for my website at jonoalderson.com. This is what the PHP looks like. It's not the most sophisticated, complex code in the world, but this allows me to describe myself really verbosely on top of the stuff that Yoast already does. in 2 minutes or less, because we're short on time. That was a lot to digest. I want to give you a few other things to think about. This is really interesting. And this is points of direction of where schema.org is going. If you use Google Merchant Center, which is a system for describing your products and your inventory in Google's ecosystem, if you have product schema on your page, Google will read it and update your availability and pricing information based on your schema. That's instantaneous and it's accurate. They stress it doesn't replace your conventional feeds and product integrations, but your website becomes the primary version of truth. I think this is the beginning of a paradigm shift where humans aren't the only, or maybe even not the main consumers of the data on your website. Now your website will need to explicitly communicate information about your products, your services, and value propositions to search engines before you're allowed to access audiences to market to them. Again, you know what this is called? Marketing. You've just got to do it to Google before you do it to consumers. And just the other day, Google announced that listings in Merchant Center will now be eligible for organic listings when you have special offers or discounts running, even if you're not running paid ads or similar. This is worth looking at. I think that schema as your primary version of the truth is a huge revolution, because it turns out that it's not just Google. This is happening it's Facebook too. They do similar stuff through Facebook Catalog. If you're running a Facebook pixel, all of your inventory becomes a reflection of the real-time stuff. Okay, 10 seconds. 10 seconds, 10 seconds. If we had more time, we'd talk through a whole bunch of stuff about schema.org for standard. I will stop and point out that it's worth exploring schema.org, the website and the standard, beyond just the rich results that Google provides, because there is a wealth of information and context here. Bear in mind, and please remember that schema.org is much more important than just getting the rich snippets. There is an opportunity to get first mover advantage on a whole bunch of emerging tech and exciting stuff here and beat your competitors. Google release new stuff for this every other day. And if you've already got the code in place, you will kick ass. Build a technical, strong foundation with Graph and ID in the way I showed you, or just build on top of Yoast SEO and don't do all the hard work that I've spent 2 years doing. Implement schema that Google doesn't explicitly reward yet, because again, you can get there first. Go have a look at developer.yoast.com and all of our documentation around the ethos, the approach, the tech, the stuff you can build on. Take a deep breath. Why do you need to do all of this? Because it's helpful for Google to understand your pages. That's a competitive advantage and maybe a critical element in the future of SEO. That is all we have time for. I think this is the most important thing apart from performance happening in SEO. I think you should too. Tweet me if you want more information. Go read all our stuff. Thank you very much and good luck.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Such a dense presentation. Appreciate all of your expertise here. Everyone, we're short on time, but hopefully, Jono, we're going to get back and have you back on stage maybe some other time. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Everyone, we'll see you in the next session.
Great.